At this time, in our gathering on Sunday, we have what we call the community moment. It's typically given by one of the members of the community. It has a wide range of topics. So if you want to give one of the community moments, feel free to reach out to Mike. He'll put you on the list. Today's community moment presenter is Wayne Lauritzen. He's been a colorful member of our community for a really long time. And the topic of his talk is kind of intriguing. It's weird times in a Hindu temple. So let's welcome Wayne and listen to what he has to say about the Hindu temples.
Well, good morning. Yes, that is the title of my community moment. We'll get to that. But a little differently, sometimes community moments are on a person's voyage or journey to free thought. This is going to involve a voyage of mine. It's a voyage of discovery in which I found out something about our core values. And like any voyage, it starts with traveling. In my career, I was in the oil industry, and I did a lot of traveling early. The mic? Yes? Okay. Anyway, I traveled all over the world, literally. I worked in forests and swamps and deserts and research labs, and I encountered many, many lovely and diverse people and cultures. And like most people who encounter different people, they find, it's kind of trite, but they find that people are the same all over the world. They laugh at the same things, they cry at the same things. And so I was going with that as kind of a basis, but sometimes the exceptions that I've run into surprise me. So I'll just describe my traveling around a little bit, and we will get to that Hindu temple. Anyway, I traveled a lot. The year that our first child was born, Ruth Ann and I moved cross-country 4 times, packed up everything and went. That started to get a little old, but I was hoping it would settle down. Well, it didn't really. We raised our children, our 3 boys, in West Africa. We had a house on the beach 29 miles north of the equator, and it was kind of fun there, but at the same time with traveling comes a downside. While we were living there, I would find myself going back to Houston for meetings. I would go to London for meetings. I would go out in the bush. I spent more time on a seismic boat than you would ever want to know about. I was on a boat about 50 miles offshore Gabon on the birthday of my middle child. It was his 7th birthday. And I called him on the radio to wish him a happy birthday. Ruth Ann reminded me that was the 3rd consecutive birthday of his that I had missed. So I said, oh, okay. Well, anyway, ultimately, I quit working for an oil company and went into business for myself with 3 partners. And we set up a very successful company which cut down my traveling a little bit until we opened an office in Algiers. Then we opened an office in London. And I found myself again traveling. So ultimately, 17 years ago, my partners and I sold the company, and I retired. That was wonderful. I'm still retired. And I thought, well, now maybe the traveling will stop. Well, it didn't. I went down to Antarctica to run a marathon. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Ruth Ann and I fell in love with Patagonia, so we went down there a lot. But then a good friend of mine named Sharad had a good suggestion. He said, hey, I have family in India. Let's go check out India. So I said, okay. So we went and we spent a few weeks bumming around India and Nepal. We hiked in toward the Everest Base Camp. We went to more Hindu temples than you can believe, because he was into that big time. And I liked it. You know, you'd show up at a temple and take your shoes off and go in, and there was pretty architecture. Sometimes these temples had little kind of dormitory-looking things attached to them that we kind of toured, in which they were raising a bunch of little monkettes, and that was really kind of creepy. And that you'd look in there, and there were all these little kids, who looked like little versions of the monks that you saw later. But anyway, it was fun. But we did all the touristy things. We went to Agra and Jaipur and Udaipur and all those good things. And then we found out about a festival going on in a little town in the northwest Gujarat province. And it was sounded exciting because Sharad said, hey, this is the festival during which time we're going to practice fire sacrifice. I'd never heard of such a thing. I said, okay, let's go to this festival. We hired a car and went to this little town called Karamsad. And Karamsad is normally a town of about 30,000 people, but a couple of 100,000 people showed up for this festival. And we parked way out in the boondocks and walked in and then picked a place where we would meet. And we said, let's meet up at such and such a flagpole or whatever at 2 o'clock, whatever it was. And then we separated. Well, I went and got in a line because if you travel much in India, you get good at standing in line. So I was in this line. I didn't know where it was going, but we stood in it. And yes, yeah, fire sacrifice. And ultimately, we were approaching this full-grown monk. I guess he'd been a monk yet earlier, but he was putting red dots on people's heads, and then they would hold out their hands like this, and he would put something in their hands. So I went up there, and I got my red dot, and then I held out my hands, and he put in some nuts and some dried fruit and maybe some berries and some flowers. So I said, well, that's cool. So I was walking along in the line, and there were so many people, you couldn't even tell where the line was going. So I ate the nuts and some of the dried fruit, etc. And then I found out what we were doing, and they were going up to these fire pits and throwing various offerings into the little fire pits, and I suppose they said prayers with them. Well, anyway, I threw the flowers in the fire pit because that's about all I didn't eat. and then I continued to walk around. And the crowd was bothering me, so I went to the outskirts and saw this beautiful, beautiful temple. And as I said before, we'd been in many other temples. Most of them were very, very open and welcoming, but sometimes there would be a sign saying, a polite sign, but saying Hindus only pass this point if it was a sacred place. If we got to one of those, Sharad would go in and I'd wait outside. That's not a problem. But anyway, Sharad wasn't around, my guide wasn't there, so I walked into this temple, and this guy came running toward me, literally running, and he didn't look like the normal monks. He looked like the Beatles' Maharishi Yoga guy. He had long hair, he was dressed in gray and white robes, and he had a beard. Anyway, but he was obviously in charge. Well, anyway, he came running down, and I thought, uh-oh, I've gone into one of these places where non-Hindus aren't allowed. And so I was getting ready to leave. I had taken my shoes off. But anyway, he broke into this huge smile, and he welcomed me in. And we weren't speaking the same language, but I understood what he wanted. And he gestured for me to sit on this little marble bench. So I sat down, and I didn't have any idea what was going on. And he talked to one of his acolytes who disappeared and came back with this huge bowl of ice cream. And he gave me this bowl of ice cream, and I sat there and ate it, and he stood around and watched me eat it. And then I finished eating it, and it was good ice cream. And I gave it back to him and thanked him and left. Well, ultimately later, I linked up with Sharad and said, what on earth was that about? And he said, well, I have no idea. He said, I would guess that during the festival someone made a gift of ice cream to the temple, and they had no way to keep it cold, so they were delighted to give you some ice cream when you came in, right? But anyway, I have thought about this guy from time to time, and that's what gets me in touch with where I was trying to get with the core values. Sometimes we had met people who were friendly. He was obviously friendly, but Ruth Ann and I had grandchildren in Saudi Arabia, and we would go to Saudi Arabia to see them a lot. And one of our surprises was the Saudi people are some of the most gracious hosts I have ever seen. And they would welcome us into their home, even though we were strangers. And, you know, what they had was ours, essentially. It was wonderful. But it wouldn't have been as wonderful if they'd known that I was an infidel. You know, that's one of the things that annoyed me about Saudi Arabia, before we get back to this Hindu temple, is I had to lie to visit my grandchildren. On my visa, you know, it has religion. And if you put none, you don't get into Saudi Arabia. You have to be either a Christian, you can be Jewish to go to Saudi Arabia, or Islamic, or you can be a Zoroastrian. But if you aren't one of those four, you don't get in. And so it annoyed me, but I said, shall I tell this lie to people I don't even know and see my grandkids, or stay out and not see them? And that was an easy decision. But anyway, it was different as I've thought about it with this guy in his temple who came running up toward me. I was dressed kind of like this or something similar. And even with the red dot on my head, I don't think he thought I was one of his flock. I don't think he thought I was a believer. But he didn't see me as saying, hey, here's this infidel coming into my temple. He didn't see me for my beliefs. He saw me as a person who was looking a little confused and said, hey, I bet that guy would like some ice cream. and so he, you know, exhibited, you know, the first of our core values. You know, people are more important than beliefs. And I liked it. Thank you.